Okay. All right. Good evening, everybody. We're going to try to bring some people up here in just a moment, but we're going to run through, basically reiterate what we talked about yesterday, and then the plan for the week, I guess, if there is a plan. So, guys, you know, this is the biggest class action lawsuit in American history. There's no denying it. We all know the significance of this. That that there is no state that can create a law, an alternative law, and then substitute that law for the provisions and guarantees of the United States Constitution. You cannot do it. So, Clause 1 of Amendment 5. There's no denying that that's part of the Constitution. It was adopted and ratified by the people on December 15th, 1791. And according to the special amending procedure of Article 5, proposed amendments, once adopted by 2/3 of both House and Senate, once it passes 3/4 of the states through the suffrage, it becomes part of the Constitution in all intents and purposes. That's Article 5. So because we adopted it, it's part of it. And according to the Supremacy Clause says that this Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to contrary, notwithstanding. So the judges in every state are bound by whatever is in the Constitution. Now, bound is an interesting word because bound refers to an obligation, okay? So an obligation is defined as anything that a person is bound to do or forbear from doing. That's an obligation. Now, again, we have obligations created by the law because that's all the law does is it creates obligations. So I have an obligation to not kill someone. I have an obligation to not assault someone. I have an obligation to not steal from someone. If I breach my obligation and break the law, then your right to not have your property stolen has been violated. So it's the law that creates the obligation and thus preserves the right or protects the right. You have the right to have your property, but we got to protect it somehow. And we do that with the law. So there's lots of different types of laws, guys. There's Constitution law, there's statutes, but the Constitution is the law that binds our government to their authority. That's what we delegated to them. So the purpose of the Constitution, again, is to establish rights, limit powers. People have rights, government has powers. So our rights are preserved by the limiting of those powers. That's why we have a limited government. So in some cases, the state's powers are limited. In other cases, federal government's powers are limited. And in more cases, both powers are limited, but they're all done in order to preserve the right, the individual liberties of the people. Now listen, okay? The Bill of Rights, the purpose of the Bill of Rights was to put into place certain things that were never, ever, ever going to be up for legislative condition, right? We were never going to put those up for to be taken away. That's why they're there. That's why they're enumerated. So the purpose of the Bill of Rights was to identify very specific rights to protect our liberty. They were never supposed to be up for negotiation. And so those are the ones that are most fundamental to our liberty, right? So we're talking about the freedom of speech, right? That's essential to being able to, be who you are, communicate, be able to win a debate. The freedom of religion, that's developing your own conscience, your own awareness, becoming the person that you were meant to be. The right to intimate association, not documented, but found to exist. That's one that a lot of you are worried about right now because your children are being taken from you, and that's where that affects. But then we get into the criminal adjudication process because remember, our government is there to create statute or create limits to preserve the rights. They're there to administer the laws and they're there to enforce the laws. That's the sole purpose of our government. You see, what had happened, our Constitution is based upon something called the social compact theory. The social compact theory is basically this, okay? It goes back to the beginning of mankind. So one day, Caveman Bob, was looking out across the valley, and he saw Caveman Bill over there. And he said, man, Caveman Bill's a pretty big guy. I think he's going to kill me one day, right? So he thought up this plan that he's going to go over there and he's going to make an agreement with Caveman Bill that if he'll agree to not kill him, then he will agree to not kill Bill. And thus they will have an agreement not to kill each other. So one day he gets up the nerve and he goes over there and he says that, hey, Bill, I was concerned that you were going to, kill me. And I would like to make an agreement with you to not kill me, and I'll agree to not kill you. They said, well, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that, right? I'm going to preserve my right to live by you accepting the obligation to not kill me. So now there's an agreement that exists. There's a law that arises, right? So then one day down the road, Caveman Jill, she heard about this agreement. She said, man, you know what? I want to get on that too. So she goes down down to the valley and finds Caveman Bill and Caveman Bob and makes an agreement with them that she doesn't want to be killed either. But the thing is that she also said, you know what? I keep getting my property stolen. How about if we make an agreement not to take each other's property too? They all say, well, that sounds like a good idea. Let's do that. So now another law just arises, right? Now we have an obligation to not steal from each other. We have an obligation to not kill each other. And now these laws just keep on coming. They keep on coming together. They keep on agreeing to more and more things because they want to preserve certain rights, okay? And that's really important because yes, we do have the right to live. We have the right to live. But in the natural state of man, only the strong survive. Okay? The natural state of man, the strong survive. In the natural state of man, those rights that we have, the things that we can do, aren't desirable. Because in the natural state of man, you could kill another man. In the natural state of man, you can assault another man. In a natural state of man, you can rob from another man, because only the strong survive. So we needed to be able to have laws to be able to preserve the rights of the disenfranchised, or the rights of the weak. We want to protect them as well. So over time, this social compact just kept getting bigger and bigger. It started taking on large communities, right? That all agreed to the same thing. And so eventually, it got to the point where what happens when someone steals from someone else, right? Who's there to be able to make sure that the person that has property stolen gets his property back? There arises government. Now, this is where government comes. So we're unique. America's unique because we won a war of independence. We won our freedom. And so on day one, everyone in America was free. Completely free. They were sovereign, as sovereign as the king, because nobody ruled over them, because we had won our independence. And so we had to come up with some sort of a plan, because we didn't want only the strong to survive. We wanted to protect the rights of all the free people. So that's when they all came together, and they tried to figure out, what is it that we're going to do to try to protect each other, but at the same time keep our freedom. Because we just won it. But we needed to put into place some sort of an agreement so that this person has the ability to be free and live his life and do the things he wants to do without injuring someone else. This person has the same right. So how do we live in a world where we're literally next to each other? He owns that house, I own this house, and still be free? No? So there's where the Constitution came in. Now, early on, we were actually a confederacy, and the confederacy was extremely problematic, because when we won the war on independence, for the first 7 years, we were a confederacy. Now, a confederacy from a political perspective is two or more sovereign states with a loose, decentralized governing structure. And a sovereign state is defined as a state that is complete in itself, not subject to a higher government's laws. So we had 13 colonies, 13 states. And they were basically just their own countries. Virginia, Massachusetts, and so on. They were sovereign. No one could tell them what to do, because they were sovereign within their own jurisdiction, within their own world. And they decided that they were going to participate in a central government. They were going to come together, and these 13 colonies would have a central government. So it's basically a European Union, right? They're still sovereign. They can still govern however they see fit. No one can make them do anything because they have sovereignty. They're not subject to a higher government's laws. Again, this was extremely problematic because what was happening then was that the central government would come together with representatives and they'd come up with an idea and they'd say, this is what we're going to do. But then when they produced what they were going to do, their central government laws, the federal laws, you might say, and then they take them back to those 13 colonies. Well, 13 colonies were saying, well, I'll do this, but I won't do that. I'll do this, but I'm not going to do that. And they kept going back and forth because they had the sovereignty, they had the supremacy to be able to pick and choose what they wanted to do. They didn't have to do anything because they were sovereign. So that's why it's a state that's not subject to higher government's laws, and they participate in the central government. It's a loose, decentralized government structure. That was the problem number one. There was no way to make the states actually implement the laws that were created at the central government. So that was the first question that was introduced at the Constitutional Congress when Benjamin Franklin, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, the rest of the founding fathers all met to try to come up with an idea. How do we get from a confederacy into something better? We ultimately adopted the Constitution, became a union. So then the next question that was brought up, or the next issue, was there was no way, there was no executive authority that would oversee the implementation of the laws across all the states, all right? So we knew that we had to create a person in a position that would make sure that the laws that were created at the central government, that they would actually be implemented at the state level. Because the states, were sovereign now. And once again, they were picking and choosing what they wanted to do or not do. And that doesn't create peace and harmony. That creates conflict, right? It causes people to fight with each other. Because unless you have harmony, just a second, guys, wait till we come up. Let me finish this. Unless there's harmony, unless there's equal application of laws, there's disjointing, right? We'll come back to a democracy and why democracy is destroyed in just one second. But that's issue number two. They needed to have someone or an authority that would oversee the implementation of the laws at all central governments. Thus, they came up with a second issue, a second branch of government. Now, the third issue, and this is the final issue, they had three main issues that they had to address. The third was that there was no judicial authority that would make decisions that would impact all of the regional governments, right? So they needed to create some sort of a supreme judicial authority that when they made decisions, those decisions would impact each of the regional governments. So we would have, once again, harmony, because this is all about creating peace and harmony. So the founders and forefathers, they went into Constitutional Congress, and what they came up with, or what James Madison conceived, was three separate but equal branches of government, each with their own responsibility, their own duty, that would be constitutionally codified and entrenched, so we can make sure that each one of them only had a certain little piece of it, but you would have oversight of each of the other branches. So we created three separate but equal branches of government. Article number 1 is the legislative branch. The purpose of the legislative branch is to provide a representative government where each of the regional governments are all represented in the central government. That's why we have two senators from each one of the regional governments, so that each government, each state has an equal representation and no greater power within the central government. That's very important when we go back to a democracy in one second here. So we established the legislative branch, and the purpose of the legislative branch is to, Clause 1 of Article 1 says, all legislative power is vested in the Congress of the United States, consisting of a Senate and a House of Representatives. All legislative power is vested in the Congress of the United States. Legislative power is power to make law. You make it, you amend it, you destroy it. That's legislative power. No other branch of government has any legislative power whatsoever, because all legislative power is vested in Congress of the United States, right? That's why I keep saying that no other branch of government has any authority whatsoever to legislate, because all legislative power is vested in a Congress of the United States. That's the separation of powers. That addressed the first issue. We couldn't get to each one of these regional governments to actually implement the laws that were created, and thus they were picking and choosing what they wanted to do or not do based upon their own sovereign desires. So when the states chose to enter into the Union, those states gave up their sovereignty to join the Union and subject themselves to the supremacy of the United States Constitution. These states are not sovereign. They can't be sovereign. They cannot pick and choose what legislation is created from the central government because of their own desires, because they're not sovereign. You see, a sovereign state is defined as a state that is not complete in itself, or a non-sovereign is a state not complete in itself, subject to a higher government's laws. So if you're subject to a higher government's laws, you're not sovereign. And even in blacks, when you look at the international standards, there's international requirements for claiming sovereignty. There's like 5 requirements. Number 1, no state can pass because they have to be able to engage in foreign commerce. None of the states can engage in foreign commerce because only the legislative branch can engage in foreign commerce. The state of Washington does not make agreements with Taiwan. That's done by Congress. So they can't pass the first test. So in international standards, each one of these states cannot be sovereign. So again, the Confederacy is defined as 2 or more sovereign states with a loose decentralized government structure. They're able to pick and choose what laws they want to do. No one can tell them to do anything. But when they join the Union, they subject themselves to the supremacy. And as a result of having equal representation in the central government, they've already accepted that they will obey those laws. That's why the Constitution says, this Constitution and the laws of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. So Providence is a little bit different. So is a district. But let's just work on the states real quickly, because the district ended up being something very, very deceptive. It wasn't good. We'll come back to that, okay? So, no, I haven't argued the Supreme Court. So, we have a union. That's what was conceived. Issue number 1 was resolved by the establishment of the legislative branch. All legislative powers vested in Congress of the United States. Now, you guys are seeing this ALJ memo, right? And you guys are all talking about how DOJ is now telling all the hearings officers, all the judges that they're unconstitutional. We're hearing that, right? But you're also hearing them say that the state laws are all voided, right? Why are state laws not valid? Guys, I've been saying this for 7 years. I've been trying to tell you guys this. Anything that is not the Constitution is unconstitutional. If you can wrap your head around that, right? That is probably, if you hear anything that I say, that's probably the most important thing that you could ever hear. That anything that's not the Constitution is unconstitutional, simply by virtue of the fact it's not the Constitution. If something's not the Constitution, that makes it unconstitutional, guys. So the only law that a United States person is bound to obey is the Constitution of the United States of America. That's it. Unless you change your legal relationship with the government, with the state or someone else. You are not subject to those government's laws because you are sovereign, because you are free. Any law that is not the Constitution is unconstitutional simply by virtue of the fact that it is not the Constitution. We're not talking about lots of constitutions, guys. There is one Constitution, one. There's not multiple, there's one. Because the people adopted one. When government goes and creates others, which is what you're referring to, the people didn't create that. You can't have the terms of the contract be breached by the government and then enter into a new contract without voiding both contracts. Because by the breach of the first contract to enter into the second, you would void both. In contract law, if you breach a contract to enter into a new contract, the second contract will always be void. So the people, we adopted and ratified one Constitution. When government goes and does something different, they breach the terms of the first contract, the limitations that they have, and by their breach of the first contract, they automatically nullify and void the second. You're absolutely right. The state statutes are void. But the reason why is what I've been telling you. They're doing what I'm telling them to do to some extent. State laws are not valid. They aren't. You are not subject. States were not meant to have laws. And this is what I've been trying to tell everybody. Because the Constitution, Article 1 says all legislative power is vested in Congress of the United States. All power to create law vested in Congress of the United States. So how can a state create a law if all legislative power is vested in Congress? How can the state of Washington have its own laws that will charge you with criminality if you're not subject to the state of Washington laws? How could the state of Washington have legislation or have legislative power when all legislative power is vested in Congress of the United States? See, this is the heart of our issue. 14th Amendment still limits the states, nonetheless. But let's come back to that. So, guys, you know what my argument is. Article 3 of the United States Constitution says, in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. George Washington University, thank you very much. So in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court shall have original jurisdiction. There's two different types of jurisdiction that's identified in the Constitution for the United States Supreme Court. One is original jurisdiction and the other is appellate jurisdiction. Now, original jurisdiction means that that's the court to act first. No other court in the country can act before the court that has original jurisdiction because it's the original court. Now, appellate jurisdiction means that they would be the court of last resort, right? Now, we're all familiar with the Supreme Court's appellate jurisdiction, right? Because we believe that they're a court of appellate. They're highest court, court of last resort, that they're court of discretion. You'd go to them last, and they would review if they agree to. That's their appellate jurisdiction, not their original jurisdiction. I'm not going to answer your question because that's a retarded fucking question. Why do you go to jail? Because they're acting outside of their lawful authority. You know, you can answer that question yourself. I'm telling you the background and history. If you want to listen to it, great. If you don't, I mean, that's a stupid question, dude. I mean, sorry. But the reason why you go to jail is because they're acting outside of their lawful authority. We have to stand up and correct them and correct their behavior because they've been trained to do things wrong, right? When I started this litigation 9 years ago, all these states nobody knew about this particular issue where if the states create a law and they bring an accusation against you, then how can that state be the judge in that case? Right? If the body of men that make up the state is made up of prosecutors, of judges, of law enforcement officers, of CPS, those are all part of the body of men that make up the state. So when the body of men brings an accusation against you by any one of their agents, how can that state be presumed to be neutral and biased to act as the judge? Remember, no man can be judged in his own case, right? If I'm being sued by ABC attorneys and I walk in that courtroom, that judge realizes he works for ABC attorneys, what's the first thing he has to do? He got to recuse himself, right? Because he has a conflict of interest. He works for the plaintiff. So when you walk in that courtroom and you're being sued by the state of Texas, and that judge realizes he works for the state of Texas, why is he not recusing himself? He has a conflict of interest. He works for the plaintiff, as does the prosecutor, as does law enforcement that arrested you, as does the investigators that are reviewing, such as the CPS that steal your children, and such as the very entity that's going to profit off of your involuntary servitude when they send you off to an institution for the direct benefit of the state. This is all part of the body of men. This is what our founders and forefathers were concerned about. This is why they created this Constitution, right? Because we have to have limited powers. We cannot permit one government to be both accuser and judge. That's why all legislative power, hate speech, that's why all legislative power is vested in Congress of the United States, right? Consisting of a Senate and House of Representatives. Because it was the United States of America that was going to create all laws by the representative governments. So they would come into the central Congress and come together and they'd say, you know what? Let's make a law that agrees that nobody's going to kill each other, right? So they would create a law against that would obligate all of us to not kill someone else and thus preserve the right to life. And then what would happen is they would federate them out to each of the regional governments because that's what federal means, is federate. So the central government would federate all the laws to the state governments. And then the state governments were there to administer and enforce the laws. You see, The states would be able to be a neutral, unbiased decision maker. They could judge a case if they weren't the ones creating the laws. But if the state creates the laws, obviously the state can't judge it. So our founders, they put together a system where we have one government that would create laws and bind the people to adherence to those, and another government that's completely detached that would be there to ensure that there was someone that would protect the minority from the majority, right? The purpose of the judicial branch was to preserve the liberties. They were to protect the rights not given up in the social contract. They were to protect the minority from the majority. They were there in the role to protect the defendant, the accused. Because if they were detached and not a part of the government that's creating the laws and seeking the enslavement, if they were detached, then they could actually make good, sound decisions, right? Because they're not part of the government that is seeking the enslavement. So the way it was meant to be was the central government represented by all of the regional governments. They would create laws, and then they would federate them out to each of the regional governments. Then the regional governments would be responsible for administering them. So if you choose to violate the law, it doesn't matter where you are in America, you will be treated the same. All men are the same. All men are equal. Because murder in one state is the same as murder in a different state. They are all the same because the central government created laws and thus equal application of laws no matter where you choose to reside within the jurisdictional United States. So all the laws would apply no matter where you're at. They would be the same laws. They would have the issues like in one state, you got first degree murder. The next one, you would have capital murder, but they mean the same thing. You would have the same treatment no matter where you go. You wouldn't have these issues where you could go to Oregon and you can have any drug in your possession, but then you go to Idaho and you're going to be arrested for having, a hit of marijuana. You wouldn't have this disjointing across the nation because the whole nation was meant to be the same. Laws apply equally. So then if you broke the law, the accuser or the prosecution would come from the central government, a different government from the state. And then your judge would be the state. You'd be a state judge. That's why Article 3 says the trial of all crimes, with the exception of impeachment, shall be by jury, and the trial shall occur in the state where which the crime is said to have been committed. It's the state that was meant to be the judge, unless the state made its own laws. Because Article 3 says, in all cases in which a state shall be party, the Supreme Court has jurisdiction. State can't have jurisdiction if state is party. So just think about how this would work, right? The United States of America creates laws. Then the state would be the judge. If the state makes laws, United States of America must be the judge, right? And thus we have a separation of powers. The federal government can't be judged in its own case because the Constitution, Article 3 says in all cases, or that the trial of all crimes with the exception of impeachment shall be by jury. And the trial shall occur in the state where which crimes that have been committed. The federal courts were not meant to be able to be the judge because the crime must be adjudicated in the state where which the crime is said to have been committed. We were supposed to have the separation of these governments. We were supposed to have this limit of power to preserve the individual liberties of the people. Our founders knew this. So, issue number one, we had to make sure that all of the laws were fully implemented, right? If we created a law in the central government, then they would be federated out. That state would not have the authority to say, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. No, because you're part of the union, you're subject yourself to the supremacy of laws of the United States. Issue number two, we needed an executive officer to be able to oversee the implementation of these laws across the country. That's the role of president, right? He's there to make sure that these laws are all enforced and implemented across the entire country. He's the one that is responsible that if we have, we're not discussing anything, but whatever, man. They're gonna limit our live again, so they won't. You guys can't do a 4-year page, the fucking assholes. All right, so the president's role. That's why his oath is that he will ensure the faithful execution of the laws. That's his oath. Read it in the Constitution. Faithful execution of the laws. So if someone's not being faithful to the execution of those laws. If someone is not fulfilling their oath, being faithful, the president is responsible for going and arresting that individual, holding them accountable for the faithful execution of the laws. He's responsible for anyone that is not following the oath, not fulfilling their duty, breaking the Constitution. He's responsible for ensuring the faithful execution of those laws. That's what his job is. And that's why he's responsible for implementation. Because if there's someone that's not obeying the central government's laws, he's responsible for going out and addressing that. He has the power of arrest. So then the third branch of government is the judicial branch. That is the highest court. And when they make a decision, that decision impacts every single one of the lesser courts. Right? The edict that comes from the Supreme Court impacts every one of them. It is the laws that are implemented in, or the rulings that are implemented in, that all the courts must adhere to. The edict. So break down the three branches of government. Legislation, law is created by legislative branch. No other branch can create law. The president, executive branch, makes orders, executive orders. No other branch can make orders. Orders only affect those that are being ordered. So people within the executive branch can be ordered. They're the ones that have to follow the executive orders because they're ordering them to obey them. But those executive orders must be consistent with what the law requires, because only law can be created by the people, by the legislative branch. President may not amend or change or clarify or, because all legislative power is vested in Congress. All he can do is direct his people on how to address their duties and responsibilities in enforcing the law. Can't do any more. That's it. Third branch of government creates rulings, judge-made rulings. No other branch of government can create rulings. But rulings must also be consistent with the law, because judges don't create law. You can't legislate. Therefore, when you call a judge-made ruling law, such as case law, that was a lie. It was an absolute lie that they told all of you, because judges don't get to create law. They have no legislative power whatsoever. But when they did create their rulings and call it law, then they started telling all the states and all of you, go and obey this, because we make the law. No, you don't, right? Because we live in a society where we did not delegate the authority to make laws to any branch of government other than the legislative branch. That was what we delegated. There's no delegated authority or constituted authority for the judicial branch to make law. So when you create a ruling and you call it law, and you lie to the people and you tell the states to obey what you put into place, what you did was unconstitutional. You overstepped the separation of powers, you legislated from the bench, you amended the Constitution through judicial fiat, and then you told all the states that you can do that. Judicial branch, but you can't. That's what's called administrative law, you guys. You guys have been talking about Gorsuch's book and what is administrative law? That's what it is. It's the administrative branch that's supposed to create rulings, but instead they created law and they call it case law. And now all these courts are following case law, not the Constitution, not common law. This is what Gorsuch is talking about. This is the whole heart of our issue. This is the heart of my argument. This is what we're going to overcome, because there's no delegated authority for the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court may not change or alter the Constitution of the United States, because that was the institution that was created to preserve it. That was the sole purpose of the Supreme Court, was to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And they failed on day one. The very, very first Chief Justice that comes in, they failed. And ever since then, they have failed to fulfill the obligations that they have of original jurisdiction. Because today, every single criminal case is state of Washington, state of Texas, state of West Virginia, state of Tennessee versus you. States are clearly named a party. Clearly named a party. So how do we know that they're actually partying? Guys, there's two people or two positions within any case: petitioner and respondent, right? So you can't change the organization of the party. So under the Tort Claims Act, you guys, government can take a side against you, right? Government can take action against you in a case, even though it's a corporation. It can take action against you. But if it does, it is no different than any other body. All right, no different than any other body. And let me explain what that means. I'm Tanawah, right? And I have a whole bunch of different parts, but there's just one of me, right? So if my hand goes out and steals something, my head can't say, oh, it was my hand that did it. You can't punish me. No, this is the whole body, right? If my hand goes out and assaults someone, my foot can't say, I can't go to prison because I didn't do it. No, you're a part of the body that makes me up. So if any part of my body goes and breaks the law, my entire body and any one of my agents are responsible for any crime committed by any part of my body. And my body has to be punished for it, every part of it. And now you bring in a body of men that's known as a state. And herein lies criminal conspiracy. Because when the body of men called the state of Tennessee are made up of a lot of different parts too. They've got prosecutors and judges and all of these different parts of their body. If the police go out and kill someone, the judge can't say, oh, it wasn't me. You can't punish me, right? No, because you're part of the body of men. If the body of men bring an accusation against you, that body of men is no different than any other age and any other body. So when the state of Texas becomes your petitioner, bringing a suit against you, then all you have to do is identify one crime that any member of that body of men that make up a state, you identify one crime that any part of that body made, and the whole entire body has to suffer for that one crime because of the inchoate crime. Because when it comes to a public official and it comes to crimes of public official, then you don't get to commit a crime, right? Take someone's life or deprive them first of rights and then say, oh, well, that was someone else that did it. No, the only way you get out of that, and I keep telling you guys this, there's only two ways to get out of a criminal conspiracy as a public official, and that's one, notify the authorities of the crimes, right? And thus say, hey, you can't do this anymore. Notify the authorities so that they'll come and address it. Or two, you have to notify your co-conspirators of your intent to no longer participate, but that must be done by some affirmative action. So what does that mean? Well, when you are a judge and you see a police officer kill someone, right? That killing is absolutely unlawful. It's a violation. It's a deprivation of that person's right to life by a government agent. When that judge doesn't do something about that, doesn't address the criminality of that agent, then he's responsible for it. Because he may as well be the person pulling that trigger because he knew about it and permitted it to continue. So when we go to an attorney general, like I did over the summer, attorney general of Idaho, and we say to that attorney general, hey, all of your fucking prosecutors, all of your police officers are all breaking the law, violating the Constitution, and here's how they're doing it. Because they're relying upon an inferior state law that they believe is superior to the Constitution of the United States, and they're not doing what they're obligated to do, and thus depriving people of rights guaranteed by the Constitution under the authority of an inferior state law. That is the very definition of deprivation of rights under color of law, the very definition of it, Title 18, subsection 242, which states any person who, under color of any state statute, ordinance, custom, or regulation, deprives any person of any rights secured by the Constitution, commits that crime. If you rely upon an inferior state law to deprive a person of a right that's guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States, you just committed a crime. And it's a crime that can be punishable by death. It's a serious offense. We'll get to that in a moment. So, when we go to the Attorney General and we say, look, here's some victims, actual victims of this crime. You might call them prisoners, you might call them criminals, but you know what? They're victims before they were a criminal. Because before you found them guilty of anything, they were not a criminal, right? Before you found them guilty of anything, they were not a prisoner. So when they were still free, you broke the law, government. You committed a crime. You deprived them of a right to preserve their liberty and protect their liberty when you arrested them without having the proper documentation in place in accordance with the Constitution of the United States of America. You see, the Constitution is there to protect the individual liberty of the people by limiting the powers of government. We don't want police just going around arresting anybody for any arbitrary act that they can conceive, right? That's Beck versus Ohio. That good cause or good faith is not established, probable cause is not established by good faith alone. That if good faith were the measure to determine probable cause, then we would be only secure in our persons, properties, papers, and effects at the discretion of the police. Beck versus Ohio, United States Supreme Court. It's not up to the police to decide whether or not to arrest us. It's not up to them to decide probable cause because we want another person involved in the oversight. We want another branch involved. That's why you're not to be arrested and taken to jail. You're to be arrested and taken to a judge, right? Because that officer cannot establish probable cause on his own. Because if we could, then that would mean that we would only be secure in our person's property, papers, effect at the discretion of the police. We don't want that. So we have a situation where the Supreme Court of the United States, early on, they decided that they didn't like the Constitution because they were all slave owners, right? Of the first 28 Supreme Court justices, 22 of them own their own slaves. So they are not for the Constitution. They're anti-Constitution. Because if the Constitution got their way, they would all be out of a job. Their property would all be released because the Constitution has declared that all men are to be free. And yet they're in the business of enslaving. And we know that because what is a prison? Well, according to the 13th Amendment, it's a place that you send slaves and force them into involuntary servitude for the direct benefit of the state. So there's no denying that we have the slavery industry still in place because our laws say that you can have it through the exception clause. So we've got these institutions and we provide those workers in the involuntary servitude through the judges. And like I said, the justices, the Supreme Court justices, 22 of the first 28 own their own slaves. They did not want the slavery institution to go away. They went and they put into place rulings that amended the Constitution because they thought that they were all supreme and rulers and they were taking on the belief of the English bar. Because in England, the judges do create law. Because in England, they have a king. And that king then grants the authority for his agents, the judges, to be able to make the law. So he says, okay, I'm going to delegate my authority to create law to the judges. And whatever the judges say, that's the law. So in England, an English bar, yes, judges do create the law because their king permits them, is granted and delegated the authority for the judges to be able to do that. So whatever the judge does say is law in England, but not here in America. When we look at stare decisis is an English doctrine, not an American doctrine. It has no place whatsoever in America. Because here in America, we did not delegate the authority for judges to create law. They can call it precedent, but precedent has nothing to do with the alteration of the law. So in the Constitution, under Clause 1 of Amendment 5, when it says no person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury, that's clear, you guys. You got to have an indictment by a grand jury before arresting someone, holding them over for a capital or an infamous crime. That's the Bill of Rights. Never been amended by the people. Fifth Amendment stands as it is today. It's never been changed. Other than that the Supreme Court in 1887 said, well, you know what? We don't really like the grand jury. We'd much rather be able to arrest someone for any arbitrary capricious acts that we think is. So we're going to eliminate that and we're going to say, states, you don't have to have a grand jury anymore. 1887. But that was the Supreme Court of the United States amending the Constitution in other than lawful manner. Remember, you guys, there's only one way to change the Constitution. If you want to know how to do that, you go to the special amending procedure of Article 5. No other way to amend the Constitution. And sedition is defined as the speaking or writing of words, such as law established, in order to cause disaffection to the Constitution, to procure its alteration in an other than lawful manner. So if you create a law or speak a law that causes disaffection to the Constitution so that you could change it or alter it in an other than lawful manner, you just create a seditious law. It doesn't matter who you are. If the Supreme Court of the United States created a ruling that directed all the states that they don't have to do what the Constitution of the United States requires them to do, obligates them to do, then that is a seditious law because it is amending the Constitution in an other than lawful manner. Supreme Court, you can't do that. You don't get to do that. People change it. So when they did create their ruling and they erroneously called it case law, and they removed Clause 1 of Amendment 5, the indictment by grand jury. They removed it, they put into place instead their ruling, Hurtado versus California, and they said, now you don't have to have an indictment anymore. Follow our law. follow the Supreme Court ruling that we erroneously called law. Then state of Washington, state of California, all these states started creating a law that says we don't have to do it because they didn't want to do it. Why would they're going to make a ton of money off of this, right? The grand jury is a neutral, unbiased decision maker that's going to review the state's accusations to determine whether or not the state has exceeded the power statutorily conferred upon them by the Constitution. It is a neutral, unbiased decision maker that will put a check on prosecutorial and judicial power. That's the role of the grand jury. Absent the grand jury, that prosecutor has a number of different ways that they can charge load, that they can add charges, add time, they can threaten you, they can lie straight out in order to create enough pressure to put you into duress that you will comply with whatever they demand, also known as a plea bargain. They wouldn't have that power if there were a neutral, unbiased third-party decision maker called a jury. Now, same thing with that judge. That judge can't be the one to determine probable cause like they do with information, because the prosecutor comes in and says, hey, I got this information. It's factual. Came from this person over here. The judge says, well, I only need half the story. And I work for the same one. I'll believe you, prosecutor. And now you're getting arrested because there's no neutral, unbiased decision maker because that judge works for the same entity as the prosecutor. They're advancing the best interest of their master. So we were meant to have a neutral, unbiased decision maker in order to be able to be arrested, our liberties be deprived. But that was taken away, right? The Supreme Court took it away because during the period of time after the Civil War, remember, we had the slavery institution that was supposed to have been abolished. We had all of these southern states that had corporations that were now not able to build the products that they needed to because they didn't have the resources necessary. And they just wanted to, get those slaves back. And they found a way to get them back through what they deceptively put into place called the 13th Amendment. So the 13th Amendment, it was the amendment that was adopted and ratified by the people of the United States that we believe destroyed the slavery institution. Now, that amendment, it started from something called the Jones Doctrine. And that doctrine was, what it said, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist within any said territory. See, what they were trying to do with that was, we knew, or our presidents and our leaders, they thought that they couldn't interfere with property, right? Because the Constitution protects property. So the North, we didn't want slavery, right? That's why we didn't want it. We'd already abolished it and we weren't going to permit it to come in. You can't enslave anyone. You can't force anyone into involuntary servitude because everyone has the right to contract. Everyone has the right to life. And you can't give up something that God gives to you, right? It was basically what most apologists argue. You can't into slavery by way of contract is what it was. So the North didn't want slavery. But we didn't think that we could make the South get rid of what they called their property, because that would be in violation of the Constitution. Now, whether or not our founders really believed in, I don't know. I'm just telling you that this is the understanding, at least of the history. So the North, we wanted to abolish slavery. South, we didn't think we could come in and make them do it, and but we didn't want it to expand. So there were a number of states that were a number of territories that were getting ready to come in as states. We had the Oregon Territory, California Territory. We didn't want the slavery institution to expand into any one of these new territories. We didn't want the South necessarily to have it, but we weren't going to make them give it up. But we did not want slavery to go to any other territory, right? We didn't want it to go anywhere else. So we wanted to stop it. So as the states started coming in, the different territories, and we started creating these other states, we wanted to put into place something that would say, no slavery, no involuntary servitude shall exist within any of those territories. Okay? So, as the state of Oklahoma is a bad example. The state of California was established. We put in the provost, the Jones Doctrine. We put it in so we could make sure that slavery doesn't exist within the state of California. So then you kind of fast forward just a little bit from that. And then we go into a civil war. Now the Civil War started largely because one of the main precursors was the Dred Scott ruling by the Supreme Court of the United States. And, this is a disgusting ruling. But again, what happened here was we had a Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice Taney, and we had a court that was extremely sympathetic to the slavery institution. Taney came from a slave state. He believed in it. I believe he even had his own slaves, if I remember right. But nonetheless, that court did not want to see slavery go away. So you had this individual slave, Mr. Dred Scott, and he was a slave in one state under the laws of that state. He was enslaved, but then his master brought him into a free state. And when he got into the free state, he's like, man, I'm free under these laws. I'm going to petition the Supreme Court for my freedom. And he would have won, right? The Supreme Court would have had to said, yeah, you're not subject to the laws of slavery. Your master brought you into a slave state, you're free. Or non-slave state, you're free. So he petitioned the Supreme Court of the United States, right, for his freedom. And he asked that court one question. He said, do states have the right to sue in federal court for their freedom? Well, the court said, holy shit, man. They didn't want to make this decision, you guys. They don't want to make any civil rights decision. That's why they're dragging their feet on this case with me. And they've been doing it for so long. That's why they're ignoring us, because they don't want to have to make this decision. Because they know if they have to make it, they're going to have to make it consistent with what the law demands. They will have to set the slaves free. Have to. Because the Supreme Law of the Land has declared that those men are to be free. So the Supreme Court did not want to have to rule on this Dred Scott case. So to avoid having to rule on it, there's two things that give you standing in federal court. One is you must be a person. Two, you must be directly impacted by the laws in question. Clearly, Mr. Dred Scott was impacted by the slave laws because he's a slave. So they can't say he's not impacted by the laws. So they had to figure out a way to say he's not a person. This is where Taney comes up with this wonderful opinion. And by the way, this opinion, if you guys are offended by the things I'm saying, guys, go and read the damn opinion, because it still is sitting out there today. It's still cited all the time. But in that opinion, what he said was, first off, that citizen and person are synonymous with one another. They mean the same thing. A citizen is a person is a citizen. So in order to bring a case to the federal court, you must also be a citizen, because person and citizen are synonymous. They mean the same thing. If you are a citizen, you are a person. If you're a person, you are a citizen. But in order to bring a case to federal court, you must be a person. Okay? Again, that's the reason why I had to maintain my citizenship, because that was the only way I could challenge the laws of citizenship to bring these people up out of their enslavement. Because I had to be a person, because that's the only way you could petition the Supreme Court of the United States. You must be directly impacted by the law in question, and you must be a person. So Dred Scott said, or the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Taney stated, first off, citizen and person are synonymous with one another. They mean the same thing. And then they said that blacks are not, and were not intended to be included under the word citizen in the Constitution. He said that blacks are so far inferior that they have no rights which the white man was bound to respect. And he said that slaves are private property protected by the Constitution. Let that sink in for a moment. So we had the highest member of the highest court in the land make a ruling that said blacks aren't people. Because if they said that blacks are not and were not intended to be included under the word citizen in the Constitution, and before that he said that citizen and person are synonymous with one another, then if you are not considered a citizen, you're not a person. Mr. Dred Scott, you can't bring a case into federal court. Get out of here. Dismissed. We don't have to rule on it. And they sent him back to his master, because they knew that if they would have ruled on that case, they would have had to set him free, because the laws have to apply to him. So they had to say you're not a person. Again, you guys, that is standing Supreme Court precedent today. You can still cite Dred Scott versus Sanford. When it says that slaves are private property protected by the Constitution, and you look at the state being the slave owner today, because slavery just switched from private practice to public practice, right? We went from corporations and people owning the fucking slaves to now the state owns the slaves. How do we know that? Because who profits off the labor and involuntary servitude of those slaves? That'd be a state. Well, if that's true, great. State is slave owner. So Dred Scott versus Sanford says that slaves are private property protected by the Constitution. So why is that state immune? Because the federal government can't interfere with slaves because they're private property protected by the Constitution. Because Dred Scott versus Sanford is still staying in Supreme Court precedent today. That slave master is immune because of Dred Scott versus Sanford. No slave, you can't bring a case into federal court against your slave master, the state, because he's immune. And slaves are private property protected by the Constitution. Government can't interfere with that slave owner's property. But again, this goes back to the state and corporation versus personhood. Because I mean, remember, you guys, when I talked about Santa Clara County, every single thing that this Supreme Court does, these rulings that they put in place, they are not for the right reasons. They are not for good moral purposes. They are there to deceive the people and advance their fucking industry. Every single one of them. So when the Supreme Court came out in 1870 on the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad case, Chief Justice Waite made a comment right before oral argument started. And it was just a completely obscure, off-topic comment. It had nothing at all to do with the argument, the case that was about to be argued. And what he said was, we are all, referring to all 9 of the justices that were there, we are all under the belief that this corporation is protected under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This corporation is protected under the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. So now a person or a corporation is protected by the Constitution, by that arbitrary statement. That had nothing to do with the case, but what he said was this corporation is now protected by the Constitution. But wait a second now, only people are protected by the Constitution. Thus, Chief Justice Waite, he created a person, he granted personhood onto corporations from that arbitrary statement that he made. Now, what's the significance of that? Well, states are nothing more than a corporation. Chief Justice Waite knew that. He knew that they were in the process of transferring slave ownership from private party to public. He knew that the states were about to become slave owners, right? Under the 13th Amendment's exception clause. Because, again, going back now, the purpose of the 13th Amendment, where it originated from was the Provost Doctrine, the Jones Doctrine. And it says, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist within any said territory. Okay? So they took that as the example to start the 13th Amendment. But they made a huge fucking mistake. You see, what happened was that when the South seceded and they started the Civil War, we got all the way until Gettysburg. And the North could have easily lost the war. In fact, it looked like they were going to lose anyway, because the South had way more money. They had way more production. And they also had the slaves that were out there, building everything. So it looked like we were going to lose. The North was going to lose the war, and there were going to be 2 different countries here in America, South and North. But then Gettysburg comes along. Gettysburg was a turning point in the war. Once we won Gettysburg, we knew that the war was going to win, but the North was going to win. Everybody knew. So what happened then was that Lincoln and his cabinet came up with the idea that, hey, if we come up with an amendment that abolishes slavery, and we push it through legislation in time before the war ends, then look, when those southern states come back in, they'll have to swear allegiance to the Constitution. And if we have an amendment to it abolishing slavery, then they'll have to agree to it, and thus we will destroy their slavery institution without a legislative stumbling block. So we knew that if we brought them back in, they'd just argue about it. Because legislation doesn't do anything. Congress doesn't get anything done. They just talk a bunch of bullshit and they don't ever get anything finished, right? Because that's what they were afraid of. They didn't want a legislative stumbling block. They wanted to take this as an opportunity that they know that they're going to win the war. Let's put into place an amendment that outlaws it. Let's get it in the Constitution so that when they come in, we can destroy it and there won't be any more talking about it. So Lincoln and his staff, his cabinet, that's what they did. They took the Provost Doctrine, the Jones Doctrine, and they immediately went off and worked off a bit to try to come up with a solution legislatively so that they could have the slavery institution abolished before the war ended. They didn't have a whole lot of time, right? Guys, it's extremely difficult to amend our Constitution. It's a rigid Constitution. It has very specific amending procedures, and any other way would be unconstitutional, and it's a very, very difficult process. There have been more than 180,000 proposed amendments to that Constitution. We've only had 27 actually be amended, right? Actually be established and ratified. Because you have to have both 2/3 of House and Senate. They have to pass it first. You know, these guys don't agree with anything. So to get 2/3 of both of them to agree, it's impossible. But then it has to go out to the states, and then 3/4 of the states have to ratify through the suffrage of the people. It doesn't happen very often because it's a rigid Constitution. We wanted it to be that way. We didn't want it to be simple for us to amend the foundational law. We certainly didn't want any single branch of government having the authority to do it. We needed these checks and balances in place so we could preserve the individual liberty of our people, okay? So here's the Civil War. We knew it was going to happen. We knew we were going to win. So Lincoln's cabinet went to work, and they brought 13th Amendment forward. But in order to pass by 2/3 both House and Senate, because they weren't getting it passed, in order to get agreement to 2/3 of House and Senate, they had to make a concession. And this concession, unfortunately, fundamentally changed the intended purpose of the 13th Amendment. See, the 13th Amendment is supposed to outlaw slavery. It's supposed to abolish it. We, the people, believe that slavery doesn't exist anymore, but that's a lie. Because the 13th Amendment, what it says is it says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall ever exist, with the exception of a punishment for crime, shall exist within any territory of the United States subject to the jurisdiction. So neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within America except as a punishment for crime, whereas the party shall have been duly convicted. When you say except, it means that you can have slavery, but we're going to call it justice from now on. So slavery and involuntary servitude cannot exist except as a punishment for crime. So now the 13th Amendment, what it did was it made synonymous the term criminal and slave. Those two mean the same thing, right? Because if you can be enslaved as a result of being a criminal, then that means that a criminal is a slave, and a slave is a criminal. And they can force you into involuntary servitude. They don't have to pay you anything. They could call that gratuity. And you know what? The slave owner is the state, because you're going to be sent to work for the state in their plantations in Alabama and Louisiana. And, you know, they're going to be working for their buddy's fucking yacht building business down in Louisiana with Mr. Cotton, or, you know, you'll be working on the farms in Texas and making hamburger patties for McDonald's, or sewing tags of Victoria's Secret underwear in Georgia. Right? You're not going to get paid a cent to do any of this, because you can be enslaved if you're a criminal. And then we wonder, guys, why mass incarceration exists. I mean, do we need any more understanding? When you incentivize the enslavement of people, right, and you allow corporations to be able to force our own people into abusive, oppressive conditions so that they can make t-shirts, sweatshirts, and yachts for $0, right? In abusive, oppressive conditions. And then you're going to blame them for the situation that they're in, when in order to get them there, you got to break the law. The whole system is absolutely a commercial transaction. If you were to read Title 18, subsection 4083, Federal Code, what it says that you cannot be sent to prison here in America without your consent. Consent. Consent is a very important word. Because what does consent mean? Consent is a contractual term, right? Meaning that you can't be sent to prison here in America. You can't be enslaved without agreeing to be enslaved. You have to agree to it. You have to give your consent. You have to enter into a contract agreeing that you're guilty and agreeing that you will go and work in this involuntary servitude so that you could pay back the debt that you owe to the government. The slavery institution, every single slavery institution that has ever existed in the history of mankind, was economic based, right? Economic. It's 4083. You can go out to the FBI website right now. You can type in deprivation of rights and common law. It will tell you. But nonetheless, here in America, you cannot be sent to prison without your consent. It says that right on the FBI website, right on DOJ website, under deprivation of rights under common law, title or the civil rights divisions. But it's 4083. Now, so what happens is that government cannot take away the rights that were not given up in the social compact, right? So government cannot take your life, government cannot take your liberty, and government cannot create an environment where you cannot find happiness. Life, liberty, environment to find happiness. Government can't do those things because the contract that was created and established our government, that was the only thing that they were to preserve, was the rights not given up in the social compact. They didn't have shit to do with fucking insurance agencies and this and that and running corporations and none of that. The purpose of our government was to protect the liberties not given up, the rights not given up in the social compact. The only purpose, preserve our liberty. Keep us free, government. That was the sole purpose of our government, to keep us free. And that was the contract that we created as the people, and we gave it to our government. We said, government, please govern us in accordance with these procedures. And as long as you govern us in accordance with these laws, then we have an obligation of obedience to you. Right? That was the consent that we gave. But once again, they cannot take away those rights that were preserved in the social compact: life, liberty, environment, and happiness. But if you owe a debt to someone, the roots of slavery have always been economic. Because you see, if you owe a debt to someone and you don't have enough money to settle that debt, you could sell yourself into slavery in order to work off that debt. That is the basis of every single slavery institution that has ever existed in the history of mankind, including this one here in America. Because this is not a system that's worried about morality, because if it were, then we wouldn't have people sitting in prison right now today on marijuana-related charges. They'd be home with their families, right? This wouldn't be about moral issues if the Supreme Court, we're creating rulings that is saying that we can have sexual deviance, right? And we're going to create that environment, and now we're going to arrest you for the things that you do within the environment we created. That's not the best moral decision. It's not a moral issue when our own government is bringing in drugs and these other things from Vietnam and from Afghanistan, creating these pills, and then getting the society addicted to them so that they can also create an environment where you will go into the environment that they created and break the law, and thus they will send you off to prison for breaking the law in the environment that they created. This isn't about morals. This is about debt, right? This is about accounting. This is about banking, right? It's about making money because it's a corporation. Corporations must make money. That's the first requirement of any corporation is it must make money, must generate revenue. So this business is concerned about that. So this isn't about right or wrong. It's not about morality. It's about how do we make money. So our system is an accounting-based system. It's an accounting-based system. Let me explain why it's an accounting-based system. Remember, you guys, one of my master's degrees is in forensics, and I specialize in forensic accounting. Forensic accounting was what I did. So as boring as that is, I came in here and I went through this and I know accounting. I know forensic accounting flaws. What we're dealing with here is an absolute accounting flaw. It's a criminal act, but it's an accounting system because if you choose to violate the law, you incur a debt to which you are charged and then called to account so you can pay the debt. See, those are all very simple accounting terms, right? Charge, bill, pay, right? Account. Those are all counting terms. But what we're trying to show with this indictment issue, this is your argument for any one of you. And they can't overcome this argument because it is an accounting system. But the way that debt normally works is, if I want to purchase something from a store, a bill will first be generated, which I sign and accept. Then my account is charged and I incur debt to which I then have to pay. That's a very simple method for transactions that anyone can understand. However, if the store charges a person's account without billing them first, that is called fraud. You must always bill before you can generate a charge. Very simple accounting. How this applies to this is that an indictment is called a bill. It's a bill of indictment. So absent the indictment, people are being charged fraudulently because they're not accruing the debt properly. You must bill before you can charge. Absent a bill, that charge is fraudulent. So anybody that claims that a bill of indictment is not first needed before charging someone's account doesn't understand the basic principles and practices of the accounting system in which they're dealing with. This is an accounting flaw. It's a fraudulent accounting entry, and they're committing fraud, and that's why all charges are fraudulent, because they're charging you for something that they did not bill you for. Because the bill must come from the people of the United States. They're the ones that determine whether or not a debt is owed to them, not a judge or a prosecutor. So if a judge or a prosecutor brings information against you and they charge you with a crime, that charge is not valid because they did not bill you first, because the bill must come from the people. It must be an indictment from the people, because they're the only ones that can say that there's a debt owed. That's why the Constitution says that tax to the people can only be created through the legislative branch. The legislative branch is the only one that can create taxes. Executive and judicial branch cannot tax the people, constitutionally codified. Right? And in the courtroom, the people are represented as the jury. That's the legislative branch in the courtroom, right? The jury. So, well, the true bill is separate from indictment. So an indictment is what you get. Now the bill is either going to be true or unfounded, right? A true bill says that the grand jury came together, they reviewed all the evidence, they listened to both sides, including the accuser, because he has the opportunity to present his counter argument. When they don't allow you in, that's a crime. But if the grand jury then listens to everything, sees the evidence, and they say, you know what? There is sufficient probable cause for us to assume that a crime has been committed, we're now going to hand down a true bill. And that true bill will be used to now bill this person, and we'll charge him. And now he has to go through the process of determining whether or not that bill is valid. That would be a true bill. The opposite would be not found. We did not find that there's probable cause to assume that crimes have been committed. This person is lying, or there's not enough evidence, or whatever, and thus they will issue no bill. Right? No bill. There's no true bill. So that's the difference between true bill versus no bill. But the indictment, nonetheless, is the document. Once you receive the indictment, it will be either true bill or unfounded. Okay? But the people have to determine that. That's why the grand jury is a completely independent fourth branch of government. The purpose of the grand jury is, one, to protect the innocent from hasty or malicious charges from an overzealous prosecutor or judge, right? So if the prosecutor wants to prosecute you, he hates you because he talked to your wife and your wife said you're a piece of shit, run around cheating on her, and he's like, well, I'm going to get that motherfucker now, right? So he's got a little bit of a rift for you because he took one side of the story, doesn't want to know anything about your side, and he's taking that as the gospel and the truth, and he's now going to come after you. An overzealous prosecutor. Right? He's going to charge you for whatever his client said you did. And you're not going to have an opportunity to be able to confront those hearsay accusations because he's not even going to let you come into the proceeding that exists for your own protection. He's now siding with one side, and he's treating two people in like circumstances differently because he is applying the law unequally by a person in a position of authority. You were meant to be in that grand jury to confront those accusations against you. They were not able to deny you the right to be present. But nonetheless, the purpose of the grand jury is to protect the innocent from hasty or malicious charges. We don't want innocent suffering in prison. And yet we do, lots and lots of them. But the reason why is because the one thing that's in place to provide a check on prosecutorial and judicial power was removed by the judicial power. To what purpose are laws created? And to what reason do we reduce them to writing if those that are bound to adhere to them can abridge them by their discretion? You cannot use discretion with regard to one's obligations, particularly constitutional obligations. Because if you could, then that would mean that you could murder someone and say, oh, I did it by my discretion. You abridged a law right? You exceeded what was written in the law, and you did it by abuse of discretion. So when a prosecutor has the obligation by law to make sure that there's an indictment by a grand jury that's used as the charging instrument for an infamous or capital crime, then how can they say, oh, I can use my discretion to charge by information? No, you just abuse your discretion to break the law. You don't let me abuse my discretion to go out and assault someone or go out and steal someone. No, there is no discretion with regard to the law. Law must be obeyed. To what purpose are laws created? To what reason do we reduce them in writing? If those that are bound to adhere to them can abridge them by their discretion. So in Oklahoma, for instance, Article 2, Section 17 of their inferior constitution, when it says that the prosecuting attorney can charge by information or indictment by their discretion, I'm going to say bullshit. Bullshit they do. You cannot permit your agent, the prosecuting attorney, to decide who gets a constitutional right and who does not by permitting them to break the law. You can't create a law that directs your agents to break the law. Oklahoma. So all the people that you have in prison are there unconstitutionally because guess what, man? You created an unconstitutional law and you directed all of your agents to obey it. And until that law is removed and the correct provision is put into place, i.e., Clause 1 Amendment 5, no person shall be held to answer per capital or otherwise if it's crime unless on presentment or indictment of a grand jury. Until that's put into place, everything you're doing in Oklahoma is all fucking unconstitutional. Doesn't matter where you got the information, why you think you can do it. Although we know why, it's because you listened to the Supreme Court of the United States when they thought that they could create laws because they were slave owners in the early days. And they removed the constitutional provision and put into place their ruling and said, follow this because we create law. No, you don't. There's never been an amendment to the Fifth Amendment. So what the Supreme Court did when they put into place Hurtado v. California, removing the Fifth Amendment, directing all the states that they could follow their rulings, administrative law and not common law. Now we're in a pretty big pickle here, right? We've got 700,000 people currently in prison across America on direct facial constitutional violations. That means that those people are there in prison illegally and unconstitutionally on judgments that don't even exist. They're void without any force or effect because if the arrest is unconstitutional because the state did not have lawful authority to be able to perform the arrest, then that means that everything that happens after that must also be unconstitutional because it is tainted by the illegality of the way it was obtained. An unconstitutional arrest can never result in a constitutional outcome. So if you did not have an indictment by a grand jury, or if you were not present in that grand jury to be able to confront the accusations that were against you by an overzealous prosecutor, that was an abusive process, it was a crime, and by that criminal act alone, there is absolutely nothing holding you in prison. There is nothing that is requiring you to go to probation. There is absolutely nothing that makes you have to pay fines because it's all fucking void. Any act unconstitutional at the beginning cannot become constitutional over time or by subsequent legislation. There is nothing that government can do that's going to render these judgments valid because they're all void. They derive from an unconstitutional act of direct abridgment, a facial constitutional violation that occurred at the moment that they performed the arrest because those prosecutors, those judges, they all had an obligation to protect and defend the supreme law of the land. And when they failed to do so by relying upon the inferior state statute, they committed the crime of deprivation of rights under criminal law. They committed the crime of conspiracy to deprive rights. They committed the crime of perjury because they failed to fulfill the promise. They committed the crime of extortion because they compelled a result through illegal means. Do we need to keep going? The arrest is unconstitutional. Whether you knew it or not is irrelevant because prosecutors and judges, you have a crime that's known as per se. It's per se because I don't have to prove that you intended to breach that obligation. I don't have to prove that you had knowledge that you abridged the obligation. All I have to do is show that you had an obligation and you didn't do it. And you have already implicitly invited punishment in the form of perjury should you fail to fulfill such promise. We don't have to take you through a trial. We don't have to do anything. All we got to do is show that you had a fucking obligation in front of a grand jury, and that grand jury can convict you of perjury, extortion, oppression, and all of these crimes all at once because there is no finding of facts that you're going to get, public officials. There is no jury that's required for us to say, oh, did they know about whether they were doing it or did they have willingness? No, their willingness and knowledge derives from the promise they made. That's what the oath does. The oath binds you to adherence to the obligations. And when you fail to fulfill those obligations willfully or negligently, it doesn't matter. By breaching the obligation, there is a constitutional violation. And that constitutional violation can never become constitutional because it's always a constitutional violation. No period of time can change it. No number of people, convictions can change it. If it's unconstitutional, there's nothing that anyone can ever do that will make it constitutional. That's why a void judgment is the result of a breach of constitutional violation. They're void, wholly without force or effect on the parties involved in dispute, because you can never obtain constitutionality deriving from an unconstitutional act. Any act unconstitutional at the beginning cannot become constitutional over time or by subsequent legislation. So the Supreme Court fucked up, man. They fucked up. They fucked up in the beginning. They fucked up in 1833 when they told every single court in the country in Barron versus Baltimore, you don't have to give the people the rights they're guaranteed under the Bill of Rights, because that's only a restriction against the federal government, not the state government. And here now comes in Washington, D.C. You guys were asking about the district and about providences or so on before. The district is not a state. That's why I claim my residency within the district, because I'm not subject to state laws. I don't stay within any state more than 30 days because I can't claim residency. I'm not going to be subject to their statute. That's why I claim my life living within Washington, D.C., 152 Wayne Place, Southeast, Washington, D.C., down in the Congress Heights area, where I got my shootings every day in front of my house, but it's all right. But nonetheless, that's where I live. That's where I claim my residency, because in Washington, D.C., every single right that's contained in the Constitution, including the Bill of Rights, must apply to you. Because the Bill of Rights, according to the Supreme Court, Chief Justice Marshall in 1833, the Bill of Rights, which are the first 10 amendments, they are only restriction against the federal government and not the state government. That's still standing Supreme Court precedent today. That's the reason why you don't get a grand jury, is because the Supreme Court of the United States in 1833 came out and said, we're not going to give people in the United States the rights that they guaranteed to themselves through their birthright as a result of the Constitution of the United States. That's the reason why. So for 243 years, no one has gotten any of those rights that are guaranteed to them. But if I claim the District of Columbia, that's federal, right? That's why congressmen and senators and Nancy Pelosi can embezzle $240 million and not be held accountable, is because she's protected by the Bill of Rights. She was protected while she was in D.C. It's the only place in the country that you are protected by the entire Constitution. We're going to change that, because we're going to change it because the Supreme Court of the United States never had the authority to make such a ruling and say the Bill of Rights doesn't apply to the states. It's not a restriction against state governments. It's only a restriction against federal. So it's not a restriction against state governments. Therefore, you only get what the states give you under their Constitution. Supreme Court was undermining the Union. Remember, at the beginning when we were talking about a union is two or more non-sovereign states with a centralized governing structure. These states gave up their sovereignty to join the union and subject themselves to the supremacy of the United States Constitution. That's what you do when you join the union. You give up your sovereignty to subject yourself to the higher government's laws. Constitution of the United States, laws of the United States. Which means that states, you don't have the sovereignty to create your own laws and treat people within your jurisdiction however you see fit, because you must follow the laws of the United States, the ones that are federated out to you for application administration. States were not meant to have their own laws. Going back to the very beginning of all this, all legislative power is vested in Congress of the United States. That's who make the laws. Our founders and forefathers, they knew that we couldn't have a democracy here in America, right? They looked at lots of different types of governments, lots of different types. And they ultimately settled on the constitutional-based federal republic for some very specific reasons. And it had to do with the geographical and changing demographics within our society. We have lots of different types of people from lots of different parts of the world over a large territory. We knew that we could not have a democracy, because a democracy means that every single person participates in the political process. I have the same say as anyone else, right? So every single person has an equal participation in the political process. That means that it's just based upon numbers, right? Well, what happens with a democracy, typically, and why they get destroyed, is because you have different groups of people that live in different areas. So like here in America, we know that California is not going to have the same values, traditions, and such as the state of Louisiana. And we know that Alaska is not going to have the same traditional values as the state of New York, right? A lot of different types of people with a lot of different types of ideas and a lot of different types of traditions and values. And we want to make sure that we don't impose one set of values upon another set, because what would happen with a democracy is typically, and here in America is the same way, but typically one particular area would become much more successful than another. California had the gold rush. California has shipping. California has Hollywood. There's all these things that draw people to California. And California's got a lot of money. 40 million people live in California. A lot of the money in California. So in a democracy, California would be creating their laws because they have 40 million people. They would be imposing their will upon the rest of the nation. Eventually, North Carolina would say, fuck you. I don't like you, California. I don't like the shit that you put into place, because they're successful. They have a lot of money, and money sometimes causes us to do things differently. But nonetheless, for whatever reason, North Carolina would say, I'm not going to follow you anymore. I'm not going to be a part of this central government because I'm not being heard, because you're just simply imposing your will upon us, and you're making us do what you want us to do, and we don't have any participation. What I mean say. That's the danger of the democracy. You have one state that would impose their will upon the rest of the nation. That's why Thomas Jefferson said federalism is not a single state or small factions of state imposing their will upon the rest of the nation, but instead acting in the aggregate and an essential buffer between the central government and the citizens. In the aggregate, an essential buffer between the central government and citizens. The states were the buffer between the central government's laws and the person being accused. The buffer, stand between. That's the role of the state and federal system. So how then do we get to where we're at today? Because we weren't meant to be a democracy, but we morphed into it because of the two-party system. Because you see, what the two-party system is doing is we've got two sides. You don't really have any other choice, right? You're going to be one side or the other. And then we get divisiveness brought in, right? We get different parties that have different views. And what they do is they start attacking each other. This one's talking shit about that one. They come into power and they oppress the other side, right? And then all of a sudden, the other side wins and they start oppressing that side. And this pendulum starts swinging back and forth. And as it swings back and forth, it starts removing people from the center, from the middle ground, right? And there becomes less and less people that would be able to bridge the gap between the two sides. And so as that pendulum swings, we just keep on switching one tyrant for another. We keep swinging in the opposite direction. And then we have more polarity, right? And as we get more polarity, there's less people that will be able to act as the bridge between the two and to accommodate, some sort of a agreement. That's the danger of this two-party system. But what happens then is that we end up in the same situation we were before, where one state or small factions of states are imposing their will upon the rest of the nation. Because what happens then is that the Democratic political party or the Republican political, whatever party it is, they come into power. And they say to their party members, they say, okay, you get in line and you support what our leader wants done. And if you don't, then you're not going to get the funding or the support to be able to get reelected. Right? So now this congressman, he has to come in and he just has to do whatever his leadership says. He can't stick up for his people, tell Congress what they need, or say, oh no, you're not going to build that bridge to nowhere because we need money too. They don't have the ability to do that because they have to fall in line with the political party. So now we've got New York, California. We got some successful state. Typically it's the ones with lots of population. Nancy Pelosi, California. So as long as Nancy Pelosi was the Speaker of the House, guys, you all got to fall in line with her. If you don't, you're not going to have your seat next election cycle. So whatever Nancy Pelosi wanted, they're going to have to do. Fall in line. So now we have one state or small factions of states imposing their will upon the rest of the nation. And you got North Carolina over here saying, fuck you, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. I'm going to secede. I'm going to pull out. I'm not going to participate in the central government because I'm not being heard, right? That's the danger of the democracy. That's the danger of what we ended up having in place here, right? That's the danger of it. This is how it destroys nations. This is how Rome went down. Rome was originally a republic, and then they morphed into a two-party system with destruction because they became a democracy. There's nothing wrong with participating in the political process. But when we have a geographically diverse nation like we do, with a lot of different customs and so on, then we have to be able to value each one of those cultures, right? I'm a white man. I don't know what women go through, right? I don't know what gay people go through, but they're certainly part of our nation. They're certainly part of the people. So if I come in and I say, this is what we're going to do, right? And I make everybody do that, then I'm going to be alienating the women. I'm going to be alienating the homosexual. I'm going to be alienating these people that I have to live around. And therein lies the problem, because of the 15,000 people that have served on Congress, only 3% of them have been women or men of color. 3%. And of that 3%, half of them are serving in Congress right now today. That means that 97% of our Congress were white men. Make a decision for a whole bunch of people they don't know anything about. And we morphed into a democracy. But it's okay to participate in the political process, but we needed to make sure that every single regional government was equally represented in the central government. That's why there's 2 senators from each one of the states, because that would allow for the states to each have their own independent power to be able to say, no, we're not going to do what you want, or because they're going to come in and they're going to be able to represent their people and say, this is what we need, because they're going to speak for them. That's the purpose of those people coming to DC. That's the purpose of the senators and congressmen, so that the central government can know what they need, right? So that we don't have them saying, we're not being heard anymore, we're not going to participate, we're going to pull out, and we're going to fracture and break down. Guys, we are on the verge, as a nation, we're on the verge of destruction. And we're following the same path as Rome, right? Because we're not valuing the opinion and the inputs and the cultures and traditions of our neighbors, right? Of our fellow man. And we have to do that, or else these states, these regional governments are not going to work together. This is the problem that our nation had when we were a confederacy. Before we became a union, these are the exact same fucking problems that our nation had. This is the reason why we had a constitutional convention. This is why we had to do the Federalist Papers. This is why James Madison conceived 3 separate but equal branches of governments, all through a union where we have 50 partially sovereign states with a centralized governing structure. So we have peace and harmony. So we don't have fracturing and breakdown, so we can value and respect the opinions, cultures, and input of every single one of these regional governments, so that they don't say, I'm no longer going to participate. So they don't say, fuck you, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. So we don't have a breakdown and fracturing of this country like we were going to have, and like we're facing right now. That's why I say that what I'm fighting for is the only thing that makes America America. It's the Constitution of the United States. That's the only thing worth fighting for right now. And if we can't believe in it, and we can't believe in the words that it says, if we can't believe in its power and its supremacy, if we cannot have faith in the Constitution, what do we have left, guys? But 50 regional governments that can do whatever they want. They can create whatever laws they want because they're sovereign. Right? We're going to have breakdown of these states where I'm not going to be able to go to the state next door because they don't work well together. There's no harmony. I'm not going to be treated the same when I go into Oregon as I would be in California, because they're sovereign and they can do whatever they want. So the only thing that we have right now, the only thing that's going to save our country, the only thing that's going to preserve our liberty, the only thing worth fighting for is the Constitution of the United States. There's nothing else. And think about all the lives that have been lost fighting for the battle for equality, right? Think about the 400,000 people that are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. We can't let those men die for nothing, right? They died to give us the freedom we have. That's why we have the absolute duty to defend freedom if we want to claim that we have the right to be free. Because remember, rights always derive from a duty to act. Where there is no duty, there cannot be a right. So if we want to claim the right to be free, then we must accept the absolute obligation of defending that freedom. Because if we breach the obligation of defending our freedom, by the breach, we will have given up our right to be free. We all have a duty. Every single one of us have an obligation. We have a duty to defend our freedom because we have the absolute right to be free. And if we don't defend our freedom, by the breach of obligation, we will have given up and surrendered our right to be free. So we have to fight for the one thing that makes America America. We have to fight for the one thing that gives us our freedom. We have to fight for the one thing that makes America America, the one thing that connects New York to California and Montana to Florida. We got to fight for that Constitution. And we cannot permit any state to create its own laws and substitute them for the guarantees of the Constitution, because that would mean that that state is no longer participating in the political process, in the central government. States are not sovereign. They must obey what the central government says, because that's what's going to create harmony. That's what's going to get all of these regional governments to not fight anymore, to not fracture, to not break down, and we can get rid of the hostility that we had. Okay? That's the only way that the laws will be applied equally. That's the only way that all men will be equal, is if the laws apply equally, no matter where you choose to reside within the jurisdictional United States. So we don't bite for Hurtado versus California. We don't bite for Barron versus Baltimore. We don't bite for the state of Washington's Constitution. We don't bite for the state of Cal. We fight for the United States Constitution. If we can't believe in that, if we can't do that, then we're done. We've already lost. And I don't know what the world's going to look like without an America. But if we can overcome this, right? If we can realize that the direction that they took us to, where we're talking about states' rights and sovereignty and all this other shit, if we can come back to the Constitution, we can remember that's our faith. The American people believe in us. And the only thing that makes us is that Constitution. So we can believe in it, and we can have faith in it, then all these other laws lose their power. Because even the system itself, even government has no power outside of that Constitution. That government has no power but for the people that are working for that government. And if those people understand that what you're doing is destroying our country because you're relying upon something that's not constitutional to break the Constitution, and thus you're destroying, those people will probably stop too. Because I don't think that they want to see a destruction of America either, right? None of these public officials want to see the destruction of America, except for a very, very small handful. The rest of them are just doing it out of ignorance because they didn't realize what they were doing and how destructive those actions are. Same thing I did. When I realized what I was doing and how destructive they were, I had no choice but to step up and do what I'm doing and stand in opposition of those that are destroying the Constitution. So we all have a duty to defend freedom because we all have the right to be free. And if we don't defend that freedom, then by our breach of obligation, we will have given up and surrendered our right to be free. So, remember, when I started this 9 years ago, I knew that this was going to be a pain in the ass, man. I didn't think that it was going to take this long. I certainly didn't realize I was going to have to lose as much as I've lost, but whatever. I accept it. And I stepped off into an unknown area, doing something that I had no idea how I was going to get there. I just knew that it was right. I knew I was right on the issue, and I knew that eventually right will always produce a right outcome. I'm going to make it there, because I knew I was right. But I knew that it was going to be really difficult. But I also knew that a patriot is defined as one who loves and defends his country. That's the definition of a patriot, okay? One who loves and defends his country. But if you say that you're a patriot, and you say that you love your country, but then in the same breath cannot say that you love your fellow countrymen, guys, this country is nothing more than an aggregate of the people. So how you treat your fellow man is a direct reflection of how you love this country. And so when I came to understand my love for this country by going out and spending time with this country and spending time with all of you, I fell in love with this country, man. There's beauty everywhere in this country. Doesn't matter whether you're in the desert of Arizona, or you're in the mountains of Wyoming, or you're in the beaches of Virginia. There is beauty absolutely everywhere. But one of the most beautiful things is the people. Like right now, right? I'm staying in someone's house that doesn't even know me, that believes in me enough that they're going to give me a place to stay because they care about me, right? I mean, we've got my brother Patrick that had never even met me and brought me to spend a weekend with him and his family and at their house in New Mexico. Thank you, Patrick, right? I mean, I've got people all over the country that are supporting me and showing me something that I never had before because we live in a world where we just don't look out for each other because we've just grown accustomed to that. But America's beautiful. But if you're going to be a patriot, then the first thing you got to do is you got to show love for your fellow man. Because if you don't show compassion, kindness, and love for your fellow man, then that is a direct reflection on how you love this country. So I knew that if I was going to claim to be a patriot, that we had to do this in the least destructive manner possible. Because a patriot, if he loves something, he will never, ever, ever seek destruction for that that's loved. You can't say that you love something and then want to see destruction of it. So patriotism is not a call to arms. It's not, let's go out and get our guns, let's go out and fight a war and kill each other, because that's going to bring destruction to that which you love. Patriotism is a dialogue between your fellow man and the larger world as a whole about not only what is good about your country, but how that can be better, because you love your country enough that you want to see it become better. That's what a patriot does. A patriot is not going to go out and get arms. It's not going to go out and hurt each other, because I love even those people that are seeking to destroy it, because I understand that they're doing it out of ignorance. They don't even understand what they're doing, right? A patriot is going to be, we're going to use our words and we're going to talk, because you know what? Power isn't the gun. It isn't the badge. It isn't the title. Power is your ability to influence others in their future decision. Power comes from your words. Right? If you can influence someone else's future decisions by your words, I guarantee you got way more power than any tyrant with a gun. That's why patriots and patriotism is a dialogue. It's words. It's not destruction. You see, destruction and war, that comes from nationalism. Nationalism is something that's rooted in arrogance, right? And it's all about how amazing your country is, and how we're all free and we impose that freedom upon the rest of the world because we're so fucking free. It's also kind of narcissism, right? Where you are reflecting onto everyone else without having any introspection into, what you do. But you see, if what you're preaching overseas is contrary or in conflict with what you practice at home, if your domestic policy is in conflict with your foreign policy, then you're rightfully labeled a hypocrite, and it is all ineffective. We cannot go into another nation and say, set your people free, when we imprison and enslave at a rate of 16 times more than the next closest industrialized nation. They know what we're doing. We're not hiding it from anybody. We just aren't looking at ourselves and saying, what are we doing wrong, right? Because we haven't had any domestic policy for so long, because we just want to worry about what everybody else is doing, right? Or not doing. Because we don't even do what we say we are. Because we don't have the domestic policy. And that's happening a lot with even in our own household, right? I mean, we're going out, we're talking about how amazing we are, but and how everybody else needs to do something different, but then we're not addressing our own family, right? So there is the concept of as above, so below. And so if you want to be a leader, that leader, it starts in your house, and like I say, if government is if our leaders are creating an environment of crime because they're all criminals, then we're going to become criminals ourselves because we're following our leaders, right? We're just following them. We're a product of our environment. Same thing with my child. He's a product of the environment that my wife and I create. If we create an abusive environment, we're going to produce an abusive child. It's our responsibility as a parent to make sure that our children grow up in environments with the knowledge that they need to be successful in the world. If they're not successful, if they can't build long-lasting relationships, that falls on us. If they're abusive, that falls on me. Right? I can't just go to my son and say, son, you're abusive, and because you learned from me. But no, it's the same thing here, guys. We got to deal with our domestic policy. We need to take a real look at ourselves and say, do we practice here at home what we preach overseas? And we don't. We don't. Josh Hawley, Senator of Missouri, I like to hit him a lot because he kind of pisses me off. Josh Hawley oftentimes comes on the news and he'll talk about China and how they are the worst worst human rights violators in the world, because they have 1 million of their citizens in abusive and oppressive conditions in the Myanmar Peninsula, where they're forcing them into involuntary servitude so they can make t-shirts and sweatshirts in these sweatshops. And they're the worst human rights violators. Mr. Hawley sits on the Senate Judicial Oversight Committee. Mr. Hawley should know, because of that, because he's an attorney, because he was a former attorney general, he should know that here in America, we have 2.9 million of our own citizens in abusive and oppressive conditions, making t-shirts and sweatshirts for 0 cents a dollar in an institution we call a prison. They call a sweatshop. The fuck is wrong with you, Hawley? You have no introspection. And you're going to call China the worst human rights violator, but yet China has a citizenry, a population of 1.1 billion or 1.2 billion people. We have a society of 330 million people. If you do the math, with us having 2.9 at 330, them having 1.2 with 1 million, that would mean that if we had a population the same size as theirs, we would have more than 12 million of our citizens in abusive and oppressive conditions, making t-shirts and sweatshirts in an institution that we call a prison here in America, but they call sweatshop in China. Who is the worst human rights violator? That's a very simple question right there, because it certainly isn't China. It certainly isn't the Myanmar Peninsula, and we certainly shouldn't be going over there and talking about how shitty they are and how we should boycott the Olympics. And, Josh, you got to pull your head out of your ass, man. You sit on the Judicial Oversight Committee. You should know this fucking shit. You were Attorney General of Missouri. You should know that we are the worst human rights violators because of your fucking practices in your industry as the Attorney General, and now a member of the Judicial Oversight Committee for the Senate. You should know these things. I can't believe that you don't. But let me tell you that China is fully aware of the bullshit that you're spewing at them, right? They're not fooled, because we imprison at a rate of 16 times more than the next closest industrialized nation. Don't call them human rights violators. Start with us. Start here at home. So a patriot is defined as one who loves and defends his country. And if you're going to say that you love something, then you cannot seek destruction of that which you love. And America is nothing more than an aggregate of people. So Mr. Hawley, before you start calling yourself a patriot, I would be very cautious with the use of that word, because you're not a patriot. You're not. Because how you treat our people is a direct reflection of how much you love this country. So I spent this summer serving 37 state attorney generals. I went back and I served 37 state Supreme Courts. I went to Washington, D.C., and I served 100 United States senators. Right? I served United States Attorney General, Mr. Garland. I served 280 plus representatives, congressmen in Washington, D.C. How many of them do you think stepped up to defend the human rights of our own citizenry? And yet they all want to walk around and talk about how they're patriots, right? They don't even understand what a fucking patriot is, right? Because they're creating this conflict. They're creating this tension. They are abusing our people. And again, how you treat your fellow man is a direct reflection of how much you love this country. And I would say that all of you senators and congressmen, all of you fucking Mr. Cruz, I would be very cautious about the use of the word patriot, because you are not patriots. You guys are nationalists. You guys are arrogant, and it's rooted in your arrogance, and all you do is bring conflict and war, right? We don't want that shit anymore. We want peace and harmony, and that's going to come from a projection rooted in humanity known as patriotism. So I'm very proud to say that I'm as much patriot as this nation has ever produced, but I'm that way because I've learned to love this country by coming out and learning to love all of you. So thank you guys so much for giving me the courage and the strength to step up and do the things I do. You guys gave me a reason to live once I found myself in a situation where I was not happy, going through the divorce. You guys gave me a reason to get out here and fight once again. So I appreciate everything you guys have done to help me do that. And just know that everything we're talking about here is absolutely 100% valid. We are going to win this case. I mean, all that we're doing right now is just simply practicing, but we're getting to the point where all we have to do is make that court hear us. And if they hear us, we will win. And they will come up with the right conclusion. It won't be another Dred Scott versus Sanford, where we're not people. No, because we know who the traitors are now. We know what they do, and we know what this industry is. And in order for them to have a Supreme Court, they must have Article 3. If the Supreme Court is not willing to step up, they don't have the courage to defend Article 3 by asserting their supremacy as the supreme judicial authority of the country, if they're unwilling to do that, or if they're too scared to do that, then by their failure to take action to assert their supremacy, they will have given up their rights down to the states. They will have made the states more powerful than the Supreme Court. And thus they will have destroyed Article 3. And as a result, Supreme Court, go away. You're done. Doesn't exist. If you don't have the courage to step up and assert your supremacy and make the agents that work for you obey the edict that you put into place, you have no more power. You have no more existence. Go home and you're done. Now, Congressman, Senator, Mr. Hawley, if you don't have the balls to step up and do your job and say that the legislative branch is the only branch of government that has any authority to legislate, judicial branch, you don't get to fucking create orders and call them law, right? Because we have legislative power. Hawley, if you're not willing to do this, if you don't have the courage to do this, if you don't have the integrity or character to do this, then guess what? By your failure to assert your supremacy and say that we are the only entity that can amend the Constitution of the United States, you can't executive branch, you can't state, you can't judicial branch. If you don't have the integrity to do that, Mr. Hawley, then by your failure to take action to assert your supremacy and defend Article 1, you will have destroyed Article 1. It won't exist anymore. You aren't center of shit, right? You just go home to Missouri and, whatever. Go back, be attorney general, be a piece of shit. But you know what? If you don't have the courage to step up and defend what you are obligated to defend, if you can't defend Article 1, Article 1 doesn't exist anymore. If you will not assert your supremacy and make sure that everyone that works for you doesn't obey the edicts and laws that you must obey, if you don't do that, you're done. Exactly. The legislative branch doesn't exist anymore. Now, if the President of the United States, if he's unwilling to step up and say to every fucking prosecuting attorney across this country that you must obey the Constitution of the United States, you must fulfill your obligations that are codified there, and you must have an indictment by a grand fucking jury consistent with what the Constitution demands, if you're not willing to step up and do your job and direct your agents to obey the fucking Constitution of the United States, then by your failure to take action, you will have given up your power to the fucking states. And you won't have a presidency. You won't have a job anymore. Shut down DC. It doesn't fucking exist if these people don't step up with the courage and the strength, the fortitude, and the character to actually do what they're obligated to do. Just fucking tell the people that work for you to obey the fucking law. Lead them in a lawful direction. If you can't do that, then you have no purpose anymore. And you just destroyed the Constitution. And there is no Washington, DC. We don't need it. And we're not going to pay any more money to the central government. And we will just have 50 sovereign states that will do whatever they want to do without any sort of union over the top. Because we can't find fucking leaders with character and integrity that actually will do what they say that they will do. That's what we're faced with. That's where we're at. That's it. So they have to take action, you guys. This is what we're pushing onto them. This is what we're trying to get across to them. When I sat with Senator Mark Wayne from Oklahoma, when I sat with his chief counsel, I explained this to him, that if you don't do something here, if they don't, we're done. You guys do not have an existence anymore. You don't. They have to take action. That's the way that the Constitution was designed, guys. If the leaders aren't willing to step up and lead, then by their failure to take leadership, they will have imploded and destroyed. We will see the breakdown and fracturing of the nation. But here's the thing, guys. That Supreme Court, Thomas, Gorsuch, Roberts, they all love the power that they have. But that power only exists because of the honor that the people believe that they have. If that court does not act honorably to defend the laws, they lose their power. Thomas does not want to give up his power. Roberts does not want to give up his power. Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, they don't want to give up their power. If they're faced with a situation where they have to deal with this or they're going to lose their power, they're going to take action in accordance with their power, and they're going to make all the states obey the edict that they put forward. They have the ability to do that. That's why I'm appealing to them. That's why I'm focused on them. That's why I'm attacking them, is because that Supreme Court of the United States, they're fucking pieces of shit today. They've been pieces of shit for the entire history of their organization. They've been undermining the laws of the United States, undermining the Union of the United States. But you know what? They can still step up and do the right thing if they fucking direct every agent to obey the law and put the Constitution back in its foundation and tell the people the truth about what you've done. And if they don't want to do that, then good. We're coming forward with the truth, and we're going to make sure that everybody knows exactly what's going on. Everybody knows the traitors that they are. Everybody knows the things they did to undermine the laws of the United States and destroy what the people had faith and belief in. But they're not going to want to do that because they're going to want to keep this power. They're all going to want to keep it. But this is the point that we got to make. This is what we got to push. You can all do that. Because if they don't step up, if they don't assert their supremacy, if they don't defend the Constitution of the United States, then by their failure to and their duty to act, they will have given up their power. They will have given up their right to be able to lead. So we're just going to keep on pushing forward with that. All right. So next week I am leaving town, and there's a couple places I want to go, but we're going to try to make some noise, make enough noise. Once again, the news will have to listen to us. I mean, just because I failed 200 times with getting the press conference convened doesn't mean it's not going to work on the 201st. Right? We have some things that I think could potentially work, including the Telemundo stuff we talked about, including the Univision stuff we talked about. I think I could get it, right? But once again, you guys, everything I do because it's the right thing to do. I do because the people of the United States need help. I do it because these people that are in prison, they need someone to help them. They don't have the money to help them. They can't pay. So I do this because I love my country. I do this because I love all of you. I do this because I care about those people in prison because I've come to love my country. That requires me loving my fellow countrymen. I do this for free. I do not take contracts. You guys know this. I work based upon donations only, and I do that because I do not want to focus on money. I don't want that to be my passion, because if money is my passion, then that means that when there's no more money, I'll go do something else because I only care about money. I made a decision 9 years ago that I was not going to do this for money. This became my passion, and now it's my purpose because now I'm giving it back to those that I'm passionate about. But the thing is I wanted to focus on service. I wanted to make sure that I provided the best service that I could provide, right? And if I focus on service, then that means I'm going to maintain my passion for this because it has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with how much money I make. It has to do with how much I love what I'm doing. So I'm going to focus on service. And I knew that if I provided the best service I could to all of you, and you guys valued service, and you want to see more of it, you guys would make sure that I had the things I needed to be successful, right? That's why I focus on service. That's why I operate on donations only, right? And that's why I'm happy with wherever I'm at, whatever I'm doing, and whatever help you guys provide, because I know that you guys appreciate what I'm doing because you guys are helping me because of the service I'm providing. That's why I do this. That's why I operate on donation only, because these people that need help, they don't have money. So once again, if you guys can, please donate. Please keep me moving, guys, because that's what stands between me and that fucking court. Is getting out, speaking with people, knocking on doors, finding a producer that will run a segment, will actually listen to what I got to say, because it's all 100% valid, but I got to be out doing it, right? Because power is the product of action. You must have action to produce the power. If I'm not moving, if I'm not getting out and talking with people, if I'm not looking for the next access, the next pathway that God's going to provide, if I'm not out doing that, then I'm stagnant and no power is produced. You guys keep me active. You guys keep me moving. I never know where I need to be, but I have to be out there looking if I'm going to find it, right? I'm not out I'm out looking for the path to get all of our brothers and sisters, all your loved ones back home, get your children back home, get your husbands back home, get your property back. I'm trying to find a way to get that Constitution back in its foundation and remove the bullshit that they put into place between judges and executive officers, all the shit that they put in that was not law. Get rid of it all and put the fucking Constitution back where it deserves to be at the foundation, so we can all live the life that we expect to live. Predictable, under a government of laws, with expectations that everyone meets because the systems adhere to those laws. That's what we want. And we can do that. But you guys, I need help to do it. All right. So I'm gonna be trying to leave tomorrow night. I have someone coming to town that's gonna be driving me, and I need fuel. And if I could get a hotel, that'd be great. But we're gonna be spending the week. And if you're in West Virginia, Kentucky, you guys know what I'm doing. West Virginia and Kentucky, we're coming your way. Okay, we're coming your way. We're gonna do what I needed to do a few weeks ago, and we're gonna get those states enjoined. Okay, so I'm coming your way. I'll be in touch with West Virginia. You already know who you are, so we'll be in touch. I need the affidavit But we're going to try to get this done this week, okay? We need to get 3 more states enjoined, and let's get that finished. All right, so I'll see you guys out on the road. If you guys want, we have Cash App, we have Chime, we have Venmo, we have PayPal. They are all exactly the same as We Shall Be Free. It's WESHALLBEFREE. We shall be free. And again, it's been a real honor serving all of you guys. We're a lot closer than anyone might think, right? Because the argument is that sound. There is no counter argument. There's no justification for a breach of a constitutional obligation by government officials. If they broke the law, breached the Constitution, what they produced is unconstitutional. And until they choose to return to established rule of law and obey the will of the people and the laws that we put forth in the supreme law of the land, nothing that our government is going to produce is going to be valid. And so we're just going to attack it for the criminality that our government has committed. And that will mitigate and render void all of the criminality of the people. Okay? We can do it. We can absolutely do this, guys. God bless. Have a great rest of your night, okay? Thank you. Thank you, YouTube. Thank you guys so much. God bless. Have a great night.